Welcome to another video on the historical markers of Bullitt County. These three markers focus on the early industries that took place in our early years. As the first pioneers crossed the mountains into Kentucky, there was little to distinguish this place from any other place in the state. Forests covered the land for as far as the eye could see. But there was one thing to be found here that was necessary, one thing that would be sure to make this place an attraction like no other. No, it wasn't the river that ran through it. It was salt, something we take for granted today, but something those looking to open up this wilderness to civilization desperately needed. And that's where we begin our story. Salt is an essential element in the diet of humans and animals. It is one of the most widely used of all food preservatives. These two facts help to explain why the salt found in this region was so important to those who first came here. Animals will travel for miles for salt. It is no coincidence that some of the early travel routes included locations of natural salt licks. Long before settlers entered Kentucky, wild animals discovered various salt springs and used them as natural salt licks. It was these animals that carved out the paths that led like spokes of a wheel to the various salt licks. There were numerous salt licks and springs in and near present-day Bullitt County, including ones that we identify by the names of Bullitt's Lick, Long Lick, Dry Lick, and Man's Lick near Fairdale. The lure of salt attracted the animals, then the hunters, and later the salt makers to this area. In 1773, Captain Thomas Bullitt led a party of surveyors down the Ohio River. They are said to have surveyed land in the vicinity of present-day Louisville before venturing to the by then well-known salt lick that now bears Captain Bullitt's name. However, these surveys were rejected back in Virginia, and the next year John Floyd led a group of surveyors into Kentucky with the task of surveying tracts of land for men back in Virginia who had received land grants for military service in the French and Indian War. Thomas Hanson kept a journal of that trip. According to Hanson's journal, in May of 1774, James Douglas, or another member of the Floyd party, surveyed 1,000 acres for William Christian that included the Big Bone Lick, located in what is now Boone County. Another entry in June, shown here, indicates that Douglas surveyed another 1,000 acres for Christian that included Bullitt's Lick. That survey drawing is also shown here. Thus, Colonel William Christian laid claim to the two most significant salt licks in Kentucky. I speculate that he had been specific in his instructions to include the licks in his claimed land, knowing their value. By the summer of 1779, salt making at Bullitt's Lick was in full swing. When Colonel William Fleming visited it in November, he found a flourishing industry which he described in his journal. While his spelling is a bit rough, his observations give us a good picture of the process of making salt. He said, "Bullitt's Creek, as it is called, is perhaps the best salt spring in the country. The earth is excavated for 12 or 14 feet over an area of many acres." He continues, "By digging from thence to any depth of feet, water boils up, the deeper the stronger. They have a trough that holds very near 1,000 gallons, which they empty thrice in the 24 hours. They have 25 kettles belonging to the Commonwealth, which they keep constantly boiling and filling them up as the water wastes from the trough. First into kettles, which they call freshwater kettles, and then into others. After this management for 24 hours, they put the brine into a cooler and let it stand till cold or near it, and draw off the clear brine into the last boilers, under which they keep up a brisk fire till they observe it begin to grain. The process required water drawers, woodcutters, fire tenders, and others, including hunters and cooks, to keep this process going. To fuel this process, trees were coming down at a fearsome rate. The once lush forest was rapidly disappearing all about the Salt Lick and beyond. In his research, Robert McDowell identified these men who were salt makers at Bullitt's Lick. Moses Moore was the main one. He leased the lick from William Christian's family and subleased parts of it to all the others. It is likely that this list is incomplete. It also doesn't identify all the others who worked at the lick, many of who likely will remain nameless forever. This is particularly true of the enslaved blacks sent from Virginia to do most of the heavy labor. Salt making spread to nearby licks, and in its heyday was the most important industry in Kentucky. Henry Christ bought part of Bullitt's Lick in 1814 and eventually acquired the whole lick, but by that time salt making was barely profitable, with the discovery of cheaper sources elsewhere. The salt works operated until about 1830, when the fires were allowed to go out under the last kettle. An era had come to an end. Today, Bullitt's Lick is quiet. Gone are the wells, the fires, the bubbling kettles, the sweat-streaked men. Nothing remains but salt-encrusted ground and a historical marker to show that it ever existed at all. About the time Henry Christ was gaining complete ownership of Bullitt's Lick, John W. Beckwith and Frederick Grayson were purchasing 200 acres from Adam Shepard that lay downstream from Shepherdsville. 50 of those acres lay in the bed of Salt River itself. This would be the future home of an iron forge. Beckwith, along with his brother Upton, ran a general store in Shepherdsville. Grayson was a lawyer and Bullitt County court clerk at that time. When Beckwith expressed an interest in buying land just downstream from Shepherdsville for the forge operation, Grayson offered to provide half the money needed to buy the land. Beckwith would oversee the construction of the forge. Grayson remained a financial partner. Beckwith purchased another tract of land containing approximately 250 acres from Adam Shepard in 1818. This tract lay north of the 150-acre tract. We surmise that he needed the timber growing there to fuel his forge fires. Getting the business off the ground proved more costly than Beckwith had anticipated. By 1822, he was forced to mortgage the forge properties to raise capital needed to keep things going. He died in 1827 before he could pay off the mortgage. That same year, Frederick Grayson died as well, and the property was sold at auction to pay off the debts. It changed hands more than once, finally ending up in the hands of John H. Baker in the early 1830s. In 1835, Baker obtained permission from the General Assembly in Frankfort to build a dam across Salt River. The purpose would have been to channel the water to the north bank to turn an undershoe paddle, thus providing power to run his forge. Baker was likely the one who built the Salt River Furnace in 1832. The marker for it is located at the southern intersection of Beech Grove Road and Highway 61. It's number 1 on this map. The furnace itself was located about a mile west, shown as number 2 on the map. He also likely built the original Belmont furnace in 1844. Its marker is located on Pioneer Drive, shown as number 3 on this map. The furnace itself is nearby, shown as number 4. Like the remains of the Belmont furnace you see here, a typical blast furnace consisted of a large mass of masonry, usually square at the base. The sides rise in a slightly slanting direction so as to form externally a truncated pyramid. In the sides there are large recesses in which are openings into the furnace for the admission of the blast of air and for running out the molten metal and the slag. The ore, charcoal, and limestone flux are dumped in from the top. The continuous fire melts the ore, and the limestone and oxygen from the air chemically combine with the ore's impurities, separating them out into what is called slag. This is less dense and floats above the molten iron. While recipes varied according to the furnace size, you can see here a typical one yielding a ton of pig iron. Ken Johnson, volunteer naturalist at Bernheim Forest, wrote that the land on which Bernheim is located has a deep and lasting interconnection with the local iron industry of the 19th century. Iron smelting, like salt production, was a major industry in this area and was a primary factor in its deforestation. Its legacy continues to be felt throughout the forest. He continues, like the salt furnaces in the area, the iron furnaces also needed a great quantity of fuel. Workers at the furnaces cut down trees throughout the area and converted it to charcoal. Johnson concludes, it is estimated that each of the furnaces required an acre of trees to be cut each day to produce this charcoal. Together, the operations of the salt and iron industries resulted in the nearly complete deforestation of our area. Like the salt industry before it, the iron industry in Bullitt County died out when as good or better quality iron became available at lower prices from other places. The Salt River Furnace ended production in 1853. When it was dismantled, the large limestone blocks it was constructed from were reused. They were first used to construct a bridge over the Salt River. Later, when that bridge was replaced, the blocks were recycled again and were used to build the Sunset Amphitheater and the Silo Stage, both at Bernheim Forest. After John Baker lost the forge to debt, the Shepherdsville Iron Manufacturing Company was formed in 1847. 5 years later, its president, Joshua Fry Bullitt, grandson of Alexander Scott Bullitt, advertised it for sale. Some work would continue to be done there, but its days were numbered. The 1860 census shows that work was still being done at Belmont Furnace. Most of the workers there were identified as laborers, but were likely woodcutters. The one overseer was in charge of the numerous slaves still forced to work there. By 1870, the iron industry in Bullitt County had ended. Between them, the salt and iron industries had consumed thousands of acres of timberland, turning much of it into farms, which would be the county's primary industry for decades to come. This has been a presentation of the Bullitt County History Museum. Thank you for joining us.